What would you do if the company you built from scratch threw you out? One of the greatest companies in the world fired its own founder. The man they fired had built that company from nothing, in a garage. 10 years later, the same company was 90 days from bankruptcy. And, after that, they decided to call the old owner, the man who had been humiliated, publicly, by the company he created. What he did next is one of the most remarkable stories in business history. It contains 3 lessons that change how you think about failure: Steve Jobs, Apple, the firing, the return, 90 days from bankruptcy. This is not a motivational story. It is a story about one specific type of thinking that saved a $100 billion company and what that thinking actually looks like. This is how Steve Jobs saved Apple. Let's go. Part 1. The man who built Apple and what it cost him. 1976. Steve Jobs is 21. He and Steve Wozniak build a computer in a garage in California. No investment, no office. No plan beyond the next week. They call it Apple, and it changes personal computing forever. By 1980, Apple goes public. The IPO raises $100 million. Jobs, at 25, becomes worth over $200 million overnight. He is on the cover of every major magazine. The world has a new kind of hero, but inside Apple, something is fracturing. Jobs is brilliant and brutal. He screams at engineers. He cancels projects without warning. His vision is extraordinary. His management is destroying the people around him. In 1983, Apple hires John Sculley, CEO of Pepsi. Jobs recruits him personally with one of the most famous lines in business history. Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life or come change the world? Sculley says yes. 2 years later, uses that power against Jobs. 1985. The Apple board sides with Sculley. Jobs is stripped of all responsibility, given a title with no power, an office with no team. He is 30 years old. He built this company, and they have just made him invisible inside it. In September 1985, Steve Jobs resigns from Apple. He sells almost all his Apple shares, the company that was his entire life's work. The media covers it as a defeat. The visionary founder expelled by the suits he brought in. Jobs is 30 years old and publicly humiliated. But what happens next, the years between firing and return, is the part most people skip. It is the most important part of the story. Part 2. The years nobody talks about, and why they matter more than the comeback. After leaving Apple, Jobs starts a new computer company called Next. Goal: build the most advanced personal computer ever made. Most people have never heard of Next. The product struggles commercially. But something else is happening that nobody is watching. Next computers are technically extraordinary, commercially almost invisible. Inside Next, Jobs is learning to run a company without being the only person who matters. Learning to hire, to delegate, to build culture deliberately. The commercial failure of Next is the education that makes everything else possible. In 1986, Jobs buys a small animation studio from George Lucas for $5 million. That studio is called Pixar. Jobs invests $50 million of his own money over the next decade to keep it alive. It loses money for years. The team wants to make films. Jobs believes in them when every number says he is wrong. He holds, he waits, he does not sell. In 1995, Toy Story is released, the first fully computer-animated feature film in history, $373 million at the box office. Pixar goes public. Jobs' stake is worth $1.2 billion, from $5 million to $1.2 billion, by believing when the numbers said stop. Meanwhile, Apple is collapsing, Sculley replaced, then another CEO, then another, market share falling. Hundreds of Mac models, nobody can tell apart. The company that defined personal computing is now losing to Microsoft on every front. The board is desperate. In 1996, Apple announces it will acquire Next for $427 million. Official reason, they need the software. Real reason, which everyone in Silicon Valley understands immediately. Apple is buying Steve Jobs back. Jobs returns to Apple, not as CEO, as an advisor, for $1 per year. $1, not because he needs money, because he wants to signal something specific. He is not here for the salary. He is here for the mission. That signal matters more than most people realize. Part 3. 90 Days. The decisions that saved everything. When Jobs arrives back in 1997, the situation is worse than anyone has admitted publicly. $1.2 billion in cash, burning at a rate that hits zero in 90 days. The product line is a disaster. 40 different Mac models. Engineers cannot explain the differences. Customers certainly cannot. Jobs calls a product meeting. He draws a 2x2 grid on a whiteboard. The grid has 4 boxes: consumer and professional, desktop and laptop. That is it. 4 products. Everything else canceled. Hundreds of engineers working on dozens of projects. Stopped. Jobs looks at the room and says, 4 things. We are going to make them extraordinary. The room is silent. 40 products become 4. This is the first lesson. Subtraction is harder than addition. Any company can add more. More products, more features, more strategies. It takes a different kind of thinking to look at everything you have built and say, most of this has to go. Jobs then does something that shocks the board. He calls Bill Gates. Microsoft and Apple have been at war for a decade. The relationship is publicly hostile. Jobs picks up the phone anyway. Microsoft invests $150 million in Apple. The war ends, just like that. The crowd boos when Gates' face appears on screen. Jobs stands at the podium and says, if we want Apple to prosper again, we have to let go of the notion that for Apple to win, Microsoft has to lose. Under booing. On stage, he says it anyway. That is the second lesson. The zero-sum mindset, someone must lose for you to win, is one of the most expensive ways of thinking in business. Jobs abandons it publicly because the alternative is bankruptcy. Apple stabilizes. The cash stops burning. The focus starts working. In 1998, Apple releases the iMac, a translucent blue and white all-in-one. It looks like nothing else on Earth. Every other computer in 1998 is a beige box. The iMac says, technology can be beautiful. It sells 800,000 units in the first 5 months. The iMac saves Apple, not because it is the most powerful, not because it has the best specs, because it makes people feel something when they look at it. Jobs understood what most tech companies had forgotten. People do not buy products. They buy how products make them feel. Part 4. 3 lessons. What Steve Jobs actually understood that everyone else missed. Lesson 1. The wilderness is not wasted time. Between 1985 and 1997, Jobs was not failing. He was learning things Apple could never have taught him. Next gave him operational discipline. Pixar gave him patience and long-term thinking. The wilderness was not the gap in the story. It was the story. Most people treat failure as a detour, something to escape as fast as possible. Jobs treated it as a curriculum. He was not ready in 1986. He was ready in 1997. The years between were not dead time. They were the preparation that made the return possible. The years between failure and success are not the gap. They are the preparation. Lesson 2. Focus is a decision, not a feeling. When Jobs canceled 40 products and kept 4, it was a specific conscious decision to accept the cost of saying no. Every canceled project disappoints someone. Every stopped initiative creates conflict. Focus is not comfortable. Focus is choosing what not to do, even when pressure says, do more. Most companies fail not because they lack good ideas, but because they pursue too many simultaneously. Resources spread across 40 directions produce 40 mediocre outcomes, concentrated on 4 directions, 4 extraordinary ones. Jobs knew this because he had lived both sides. 40 directions, 40 mediocre results. 4 directions, 4 extraordinary ones. The third lesson is the most personal. Jobs was fired by the company he founded, publicly, by the man he hired. And he came back anyway, not because he had forgiven everyone, not because he had processed his feelings, because the mission was bigger than the humiliation. Lesson 3. The mission is bigger than the humiliation. This is the hardest lesson. Pride is the most expensive emotion in business. The natural response to humiliation is to stay away. Jobs did the opposite, walked back into the building that humiliated him and got to work. Because Apple needed him and he needed Apple. In 1997, Apple stock is around $4. Jobs takes over. By 2007, it is $200. By 2012, the year after his death, it is $700 per share. $4 to $700, built by a man they fired. When Jobs died in 2011, Apple was the most valuable company in the world, a company that had been 90 days from zero just 14 years earlier. He turned it around not through luck or one brilliant idea, but through a specific and learnable set of decisions. Part 5. What this means for you, right now. The wilderness lesson applies to anyone who has been fired, passed over, or forced to start over. The instinct is to treat that time as dead. Jobs' 12 years between founding Apple and saving it were not dead time. They were the foundation of everything that followed. The time between failure and success is not dead time. It is foundation time. The focus lesson applies to every decision about where to put your time and energy. The question is not, what should I add? It is, what should I remove? Most people run 40 projects. Jobs ran 4. The math is simple. The discipline to do it is not. But it is available to anyone willing to accept the discomfort of saying no. The mission lesson is the hardest and the most valuable. When you are clear on what you are building and why, small humiliations become irrelevant. You can walk back through the door. You can call the person you argued with. You can accept help from a competitor, not because it is comfortable, because the goal matters more than the discomfort. 3 lessons. From one of the most extraordinary comebacks in business history, Jobs was fired at 30. He returned at 42. The 12 years between were not wasted. They were the only reason the comeback was possible. He could not have saved Apple in 1986. He was ready in 1997. 1. The wilderness is preparation, not punishment. 2. Focus is choosing what not to do. 3. The mission is bigger than the humiliation. The question is not whether you will be fired, rejected, or forced to start over. You will. The question is what you do with the time between, whether you treat it as dead time or as the curriculum. Dead time or curriculum, that is the only decision that matters. Which of the 3 lessons hits closest for you right now? Write it in the comments. The answers tell me what to make next. He was not ready in 1986. He was ready in 1997. 12 years of preparation disguised as failure. That is the whole story. Fired at 30. Returned at 42. The wilderness made it possible. Subscribe so you do not miss it. See you there.